I'm BB Miniatures, and welcome to the latest tutorial on the Pro Palette. This time, we'll be jumping into another Legion paint recipe for my new take on the classic Ultramarines. Contained in this large tutorial, I run you through all 12 chapters in sequence to show you how this sergeant is painted from start to finish. We'll be covering all sorts of topics from the airbrush, brush blending, decal unification, mixing metallics and N&M together, contrast washes, brush chipping, pigment and dry pigment use like weathering powders, and even some glowing OSL. All this in a style that kind of sits an interesting segue from a graphic illustration that I really much enjoy, also mixed with a bit of weathering and grimdark, and from that and like the scale model community. As well as the paint scheme that we're creating here is primarily positioned for the tabletop, but for all the players looking for a little bit of added flair, there's some simple techniques in here that could add a little bit of extra detail to your models on the tabletop that you guys are looking for. Without further ado, best thing to do is grab your paints, grab your brushes, and most importantly, your thinking caps as we get ready to paint this miniature. All right. Let's begin. Okay, so the first thing off is we're going to start by base coating the whole Ultramarine with navy blue. This is all done with scale 75 scale color with a rough mixture between a 1-to-1 between acrylic thinner and paint. The acrylic thinner that I'm going to be using for the whole project is from AK Interactive, but any other acrylic thinner I think will generally do. I'm just going to run it through the airbrush and around 2 bars or 25 to 25 psi, and using a harder Steinbeck Eclipse with like a 0.4 needle. And we just want to give that a nice base coat, nothing too fancy, just make sure the whole model's coated. Around like two thinner coats is always better than ideal rather than one large one. And now we're going to start the highlights. So again, this is the acrylic thinner I've been using, and the paint that I'm going to be using here is a Mediterranean blue, again scale color. And the thinner, the mixture in this one is going to be a bit thinner, so I mostly use around 2 parts thinner to 1 part paint. I like to keep these, I like to keep my airbrush layers a lot thinner, and the reason for that is since I can put down a thinner layer, most of the color from the previous layer will show. So the first pass it'll look bright because when you're going to see it projected on the model, wet paint always looks a lot brighter and a lot more richer than it is. But when it dries, it actually dulls down, and you actually see most of the previous layer that's in there, in this case the navy blue. But the nice thing about painting with thinner layers is just with a single shade that's in your cup, we can actually get a smoother gradient, so we can actually get more values out of our airbrush application, as well as I find it reduces the chances of speckling and a harsher transition if you're just using thicker paint through the airbrush, as well as it's a lot easier to clean. So you spend a little bit more time airbrushing, like painting the model, but you get a better finish, and you spend less time like declogging this thing a lot. And of course I use a 0.4 needle. I don't find that you need anything smaller, especially for army painting. Any needle any smaller, I find that, especially if you're going to be painting a unit of 10, it gives you a kind of a headache with the amount of cleaning that you have to do. Now, in terms of the highlights, what you really want to do is you want to accentuate each individual highlight point, and we're going through a general zenithal, like above kind of approach, but in more towards volumetric highlights. So on round areas such as like the shoulder pads or big spheres, they kind of look like big spheres. We just want to give larger round highlights at the top. And areas such as the legs, the power fist, the chest, those are all like big cylinders, and generally a light along a cylinder is a nice illuminated line straight down. The cool features, especially about this Space Marine in particular, is looking at the stance. So the front leg is really standing forward, so that's where I want to give most of the highlight onto the leg, where the back leg, his left leg, is in a stepping motion, so you're going to see me never aiming the airbrush down below. And that goes into a stance of any upwards facing volume that's facing up towards the light is going to get a highlight. Anything that's facing down is not. Now we're going to start off with the next highlight. The next highlight is with the Mediterranean, just more Mediterranean blue. So we're adding a little more of that Mediterranean blue into the mixture. And where the previous highlight was a bit of like a navy blue and Mediterranean blue together, this is just pure Mediterranean blue. You can see me adding a little bit more water. I don't always add, like, I'm using a lot of acrylic thinner, but sometimes I add a little bit extra water just to get a little bit thinner. Or again, when you're working with thinner airbrush coats, go light on the trigger, don't go heavy. But getting used to this will give you like a nicer, a much more smoother application. It does take a little bit more time, but I find the time is definitely worth it for the finish. You can see me now that I'm applying these highlights. Now my highlight areas are just getting a little bit more smaller, and I'm actually really going to only be concentrating on mostly the upper part of the model. So the backpack, you see the power fist again, that's a big, like, a very big feature. It's a big weapon on the Space Marine, and we want to give that some extra light. You can also think about when you're adding highlights to your Space Marines, like giving light to the most important things on the miniature, which also help a lot. And because the brighter it is, generally that's where our attention is directed to. So again, you can see that forward stepping leg that I really want to highlight, that got a highlight as well. The shoulder pad, the backpack is very exposed. The side of the helmet, and then see how this leg is backstep, but that leg is facing upward towards the light. I'm going to bring more highlight on there onto that side. So and then there's going to be little light on the back of the forward stepping leg. They just get opposite treatments. It'll make it look like he's stepping forward. Now for the third highlight is, now I'm just getting Mediterranean blue and mixing in some white, or sorry, sky blue and some white. And now for the final highlight. Now we're going to be extremely selective, and I'm only going to highlight the upper parts of the model, really. So you're really looking at pretty much anything from the chest and up, just because it's the final highlights. And it also gives it a little bit of illusion that, light is falling. So the same highlight wouldn't actually come to the intensity down near the bottom of the ground. We're just going to keep it more at the top. The only time I might be able to add highlight below the chest area is that forward stepping leg. I might just give a little bit at the top there, just to really give that illusion, really give that feeling that he is stepping forward and into the scene. And if you're doing this for a batch of like 10 Space Marines, just doing one thin layer, moving on to the next model, and by the time you get to the front model, of course that'll be ready to dry, and you can apply your second coat of whatever highlight that you're doing, just to keep the chain going. And yeah, that's what it should look like after the airbrush stage. Okay, so now we're on to the stage of blocking in the metals. Now, for this Ultramarine scheme, we're actually using both a little bit of like NNM and metallics in the same project. Yeah, it's kind of funky, but my reasoning behind this is that, a lot of this is more like gun casing, so it's not like, raw metal that's being shown and, you need the metallic flake. It's more like, a very dark metal casings, or that are we going to be using on the the ribbing, so like the in between the joints of the armor, the neck, the chest, that kind of like, I don't know, strap thing that's across his chest. I really don't know what that is, but it looks kind of cool, as well as the fingers for the power glove and the cables as well, so that the main cable that runs on the power fist gauntlet. And it's just to give a little bit of a change, and I quite like the look, you know, combining both of them. I think it looks kind of cool. So the paint that I'm using right here at the very beginning is Petrolium Gray by Scale 75, and you're just going to give this a nice even coat on all the areas that we need to, that we're going to be highlighting up with some grays. So now on the palette here, you can see there's a big pool of where the Petrolium Gray was on the right, and the color next we're going to it is Brown Gray, again by Scale 75, and we're going to start painting out some highlights. So throughout the stage you're going to see some slow motion, and then I'm going to speed up some parts. They're just repeated. So the first part, we're just laying down the initial highlight, and the most important parts, of course, is like mostly the chest, the plasma gun, and get into like the recesses. I want to leave that critical parts gray as a recess shade, and I'm just pretty much blocking in all the raised areas with brown gray. To give a little bit of light direction, it's optional. See on the chest area, I left a sliver of on the left and the right of the center kind of hexagon shape that's in the front there, and that's just a, you know, I have a little bit of light, primary light coming from, you know, a little bit above on the right, and then there's a little bit of a like a little catch of light down at the bottom left, and it's optional. It's such a small little detail, but I mean, if you want to put in those little extra parts, go for it. And I'm also, again, along the rest of the straps, I'm just highlighting. I'm pretty much blocking in the whole face of each section of that strap that goes across, and just leaving in the Petrolium Gray in the recess. For the paint mixture that's onto there, all of my layering paint is pretty much done as a 1-to-1 mixture, so 1 part water to 1 part paint, thinned out a little bit. This just helps paint, of course, the paint flow through my brush and move along the miniature easier, as well as, you know, you're not painting with super thick layers where the point is, you know, you're actually to the nth that you might actually see some paint build up. This keeps it nice and thin, and nice and easy and workable, especially on these especially on this these like kind of like ribbed sections. So this same texture is located on the back of the legs, and in between all like the armor joints, so the flex joints pretty much. The brush I'm using here is I like using all my brushes by Artis Opus, and this is just a size 0. I found it goes into a nice sharp point, and I find the bristles long enough that it holds, you know, just enough charge that I want to, and I like a little bit of the snap. You don't have to use them, but I mean, I really just enjoy the feel, and they paint well. Here on the ammo pouches, I do a little bit of like almost like a little bit of like a scribble technique, and keep in mind, because later on, just to fast forward into the video, there is going to be a form of a wash that's going to go over pretty much the whole miniature. And the nice thing is, if you ever keep in mind when you're painting with the wash, is that all the colors get dulled down a little bit, and all of your brush strokes, if you have some very sharp stroke lines, especially like, you know, little scribbles that I did on that kind of, I don't know, some accessory pouch, those get softened every time you put a wash, or like like if you're applying like a wash or anything that, you know, covers the whole miniature in a thin layer, much like a filter does and stuff. So keep that in mind when you're, you know, painting up your own schemes. But here I am again, I'm just going back to the highlights on the glove. Again, I'm just picking out the parts, the individual sections of the fingers. So there's like, and just leaving that gap, doing your absolute best. If you do get some paint in there, don't worry, you can always get some Petrolium Gray and just go back into areas that you've missed. But taking a little bit of time and keeping it neat is always better, so you don't have to keep going back and going back with like a darker color and cutting out your eraser bits. Now for the plasma pistol, again on the casings, what I'm really doing to help you speed it up and with the highlights is just focus on all the upraised areas of the plasma pistol. I didn't actually take this highlight color and actually go on the bottom of the barrel just because of my lights coming from above. I'm just going to keep all majority of the light at the top here. And with your it's very common, so with your 1-to-1 mixture of paint, you might have to do a second thin coat on top just to gain a little bit more opacity. And when you're just you can pretty much do a layer and you can just tour through the model, and then by the time you come back to that section, you can give a second layer and you can reach full opacity. And of course, depending on the finish, if you're not as worried, you want a lower finish and you don't want as solid, then skip the second layer. But I don't. Same thing with the power tubes. So if you look at, I'm not painting the underside of the tubes. I'm just painting the top side, because that's where that's where all the light is going to be received anyway. And we don't have to worry too much of the underside, so the shadow facing places. We're not getting complex into, painting like total rebounding lights and stuff. We just want to keep this a little bit simple just for the tabletop, but we still want to look striking. A good note on the ribbed armor joints here, so the flex points here. If you notice, on his right leg, I tend to favor the right side more than left, so I tend to bring the highlights out to the outside. There's going to be a lot less light on the inner parts, so don't worry about it. And now for the second color. The second color that we're going out is graphite. So again, we're just taking the next gray up from scale 75, and we're highlighting on top of our previous layer of the brown gray. And all you're trying to do is to keep the highlight points smaller. A good thing to note is when we start highlighting from this point, and for our max highlight, you don't have to retrace every single panel on this chest. What we really want to do is I want to really focus most of the light towards the center of the chest to make, it also makes the chest look bigger. It looks a little more barreled, and therefore more light gathers down the center. So if you even take a look at the straps, see at the very, very top left and the top right, there's no highlight there from this stage. And this is how I'm trying to concentrate most of the light down the center. Here again, the accessory pouch is I'm keeping the highlights smaller now. I do a little bit of just the surface scribbles just to give it a little bit of a highlight, and just mostly focusing on the edges. Now again, a similar concept when we get when we are highlighting the chest. When we're highlighting these fingers of the power glove, it's the thumb and the pointer finger and possibly the middle finger that are mostly in the light. So they're the ones that are facing, mostly towards upwards, and where the last two, the ring finger and the pinky finger, they're the lowest ones. So I actually don't bring this highlight down to those fingers. This will just give a natural, a little bit of an illusion that the light is falling. It brings a little more, just a little more lighting atmosphere into the miniature. And if you really want to look at it as a bonus, you highlight less. So you don't have to highlight as much. So the brighter you go, the less surface area that you're actually highlighting. And this is true for majority of highlights that I do on these tabletop miniatures. So you can see even the majority of the thumb got the highlight, but now going down to the bottom of the fingers, that even that ring finger only just got a thin line. And the same principle applies here. So the plasma pistol, I'm just gathering the light towards the top of the barrel, and just applying a little bit of an edge highlight as well. Keeping in mind, just keep all the light near the top, and you can't really go wrong. Even those little details, I'm just painting the raised details and just any upwards facing edge. And again, with this cable here, we're just keeping the highlight at the top side of each of the cylinder sections. And then just to bring out a little bit more shape, sorry, just got a little bit out of focus there, just bring each a little bit of extra shape into each of those little cylindrical parts of the cables, as I just did a little bit of an edge highlight. Again, you don't have to wrap that edge highlight all the way down. Stop where the first section of highlight that you've painted. And again, on the flex joints, on the right leg, I'm hugging most of my highlight to the right side, and on the left, I hug the highlight more to the left side as well. Now for the final highlight here, the last color that I have on the palette on the left, I know it's really blown out, but it's Nacar. It's just an off-white from scale. It's got a little bit of like yellow tint to it. So, it's not a pure white, it's just a bit of an off-white. And all we're doing again is you're just retracing the final highlights and just bringing it, again, like I'm only gonna bring these highlights closer to the center. So you're gonna see that, of course, the center of the chest there, that gets most of this max highlight. And then on each of these straps, you're only going to see this max highlight, I think, only on two sections of the chest strap. It might go up to the third one, I can't completely remember. But even then, the big difference is the section of the strap that's closest to his chest is the largest coverage of this max highlight. And then as I move away from it, the less and less area actually gets covered by this highlight. Again, it's kind of like bringing that as a global piece together. We want to bring most of the highlight down to the center. And also with these highlights, I would just generally keep them to the chest pieces, the power fist and the plasma pistol, and probably the cable that's attached to the power fist. This max highlight you don't really need to bring to the flex joints behind the knees and just the lower sections, just because of where the light is situated. We want the brightest parts near the top of the miniature and then the light naturally falling. So again, like I said, the brighter we get, the less highlight things actually get it. And also in this case, we want to look at a little bit of verticality on where those elements are positioned. So a general rule of thumb is anything up high that's on the miniature is going to get these max highlights, and then anything from the waist and lower, I tend to stay away from them unless it's like a key piece on the miniature that you really want to bring light to, or you just want a brighter miniature, go for it. But if you want to achieve a little bit of this moody atmosphere with a little bit of that grimdark kind of flavor that you see at the final image, then generally follow this guide. And again, just reinforcing that idea, you're only going to see the highlights on, I believe, those two fingers. I don't go past the middle finger. And there you can actually see like a natural drop off of light, and you don't need to you don't need to have like a camera to take a photo to get that specific result. That's just all paint. Here's me just doing a little bit of a little bit of nitpick. I'm just just picking out any little extra highlights. I think it's pretty much done. Even reviewing this, I was like, did I really need to do that? Probably not. But I just wanted to bring a little extra opacity, because again, I am painting with a thinner paint. With that 1-to-1, sometimes you need an extra little layer. Okay, now into the metallics. So here I'm going to be using Vallejo Model Metal Color Gold, and we're just going to be blocking in all the metallic golden areas on the miniature here. So that's going to be on the crest of his helmet, the detailing of the trim on the shoulder pad, and I think that's it for the gold. But a really good note besides blocking in colors, which is normally I'm just doing straight out of the pot, and I did put it in a metal dish rather than a wet palette, is because with metallics I find if I get the metallics to bleed onto the parchment paper, I find it's a bit of a mess, and I kind of want to keep that away from my matte paints anyway, just because of the metallic flake too. It's also a good idea to after you do this metallic blocking or any metallics, you should change your water, your cleaning water, just because you don't want those flakes to be floating around, especially when you're painting with the other matte colors. You might get a little bit of that in there. One thing to really notice with this paint is that it is fairly thin and fairly runny. This is because I think they formulated it for more of the airbrush, but the nice thing is working with brushes and painting this paint into detail, it seems to run just like in there. You can kind of see it go into the crevices and the details of that of the shoulder pad. But just watch out, especially when you're painting a flat area. This is the most notable part, is just watch the charge, so how much paint you're loading in the brush. If you're getting too much paint in your brush, it shouldn't be swollen with paint. You should never see the whole brush just get completely enlarged. That's a good sign. That's a easy sign that you're picking up too much paint, and if that's the case, just wipe a little bit off a paper towel. It's not a waste of paint. It's a waste of paint if you get way too much on the model and screw up. So don't be afraid to wipe off some charge, and just going through and just carefully painting, blocking in all the areas that we need gold. When it comes to the inner edge of the shoulder pads and other detailing, it's optional to paint them in. If you do, it adds a little bit of extra detail, and also practices your steady hand. But it's not completely critical to do it. As well as if you get a slight little bit of a bleed off, you're not really going to see it, especially after we do the contrast shading section. Especially in the crevices, you're not really going to see much at all. And probably the hardest part is the most painstaking thing is to paint these studs. The easiest way I found painting these studs is by holding the tip of your brush down at approximately like 90-degree angle right down towards the center of the stud, touch the very tip of the stud, and then paint a small little circle, moving the brush tip around the stud, while still keeping a pivot point, keeping near the top of the stud. If you have to leave a little bit of a gap, it's better to leave a gap rather than just try to push right down to the base of the shoulder pad itself. If you leave a slightly little bit of a gap, chances are, especially when we're doing the shading section, is this will get covered. So don't feel it's like mission critical to get the stud perfect. The closer you can to perfection, the better. But especially when you're repeating this over a whole unit, you might feel a little bit repetitive, or you might see your accuracy decrease. So rather than not touch on the blue. Next off is the silver. So this is the same Vallejo model color line of metal, and it's called steel. Now, I saved majority of this metallic just for the back of the backpack, just because I thought is the most more industrial and the utility part of the Space Marine, where most of the rest of their armor is also like very decorative. So there'd be like gun casings and stuff like that. But for here, I just base coat all the metallic parts with this steel. Even on the exhaust parts, I initially had the idea of keeping the exhaust parts blue, but I decided to break it up and just give a little more steel and metal to the rear of the model. Okay, so now we're on to the Legion icon and the laurels that are on top of his helmet, and we're both going to be painting these white. So on the palette on the top left, there's two rows. Now on the left side of the row, starting from the bottom left, is rainy gray, and then following that is Mojave white, and then just pure white at the top. And on the right column, that's the mixtures I've made. So it just starts off with rainy gray. And then the next one above that is actually a bridge between rainy gray and Mojave white. And then above that is just Mojave white. And then the very, very top right is Mojave white mixed with white. If you're familiar with my foundations video of bridging, you're gonna kind of see this in action actually as I go through this. So you just want to base coat the whole icon with this rainy gray. Just be extra careful. We don't really want to get much on, we don't want to slip and go onto the airbrush blue. We can always touch it up, but it's always nice when we don't have to. And the thing in particular with the icon that'll take a little bit more time is just watch for the beveled parts of the miniature. So that's what gives that the icon that three-dimensional look on the miniature itself, so it's sculpted in. So I'm mostly paying attention to the bevel that's facing upwards, so it's facing up towards the light. And I want to give that a little extra attention is because we want to like highlight that and show that it is a sculpted on detail, and a little bit less than it's just like freehand. Freehand's nice. So just pay careful attention to go through. Again, my paint mixture on the palette is just like my layer consistency, so it's like a 1-to-1 water to paint. And sometimes you need a second coat just to get a smooth and even coating on there. And now we're gonna jump straight up to Mojave white. So we're gonna skip the intermediate and just paint the highlight with Mojave white. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paint it in the upper areas of the Legion icon. Sorry for a little bit of the focus there. And of course, attention to the bevel at the top there. So we're trying to get that highlight just halfway up, nice and smooth. And speaking of smooth, if you ever have problems painting with low coverage paints, just have the mantra in your mind is smooth is slow, slow is fast. So just meaning just take your time, have an even stroke, don't rush it, have like a nice smooth stroke, and let layers dry in between before you apply a second coat to get that opacity that you need. And you shouldn't be fighting it, and it'll feel good. Now with the highlight painted, now we're going to paint the bridge. So that's where you'll grab your intermediate color and you're just going to fill it in between. And what you want to do is you want to have a little bit of an overlap on the highlight and overlap in the darker color there, which is the rainy gray. And the same thing, we're going to take that intermediate cover, and now I'm going to do a little bit of a highlight down the middle of the icon. This will just help give a little bit of extra body to the icon at the bottom. Especially since that the shoulder pad is rounded, so that point where we highlight is the furthest it's protruding forward. But since it's lower than the upper part of the icon, we don't go as bright into the body of the icon. and it'll just help just create this more three-dimensional looking shoulder pad where we want to illustrate that it's round. Again, we're just emphasizing more highlights at the top. And this is with our Mojave white and white mixed together. So it's like, again, it's around like 50-50. And again, I'm really paying attention. I'm really emphasizing more of the bevel. So we want to do like edge highlight, the upper parts of the icon, and then along the bevel there. Then probably we're gonna get close to probably the most trickiest highlight is actually gonna be the bevel that's in the inside, the upper inside of the icon, as you're gonna watch here. The best advice I have for here is to get a good sharp brush, especially for this section, and just watch your charge. You see how much paint I have actually on my brush. Remember, it's just to look at it, it's not swollen full of paint. I only have fairly like a little bit of paint, just nearly mostly at the tip, and just carefully position the model on an angle that you can easily get within that bevel. And now I'm just taking pure white, so not the Mojave white mix, just pure white, and I'm just doing the very, very edges. And I'm just keeping those highlights at those three main points, so closest to the tops of each serif of the icon, and then down the middle. And now we do the laurels. The laurels are actually really, really simple, nice and easy. Very similar to the same as the Legion icon, but this time we don't have to do any sort of real blending. The area is so small already, all we can do is just layer up as we would. Without any bridges. We can actually skip the bridges just because of the area of the blend is so small. We can just go from rainy gray, and then we can go up to the Mojave white. And fairly similar to how we highlighted the black earlier in the video. Just doing our best not to flood the whole laurels, and just paint on the raised areas of the detailing on the helmet, and you should be fine. And there we are, the white's finished. Alright, so you've been patient doing a lot of mostly color blocking, airbrushing, and a little bit of blending with some white. But here's where we start to give a little bit of grime and a little bit of panel lining as well, all with some Games Workshop contrast paint. Now this can of course can be done with like oil paints, but the nice thing is about contrast, it's water-based paint, and it'll dry much faster. But you don't have as long of a working time, but hopefully with a little bit of practice and watching how I do it here, you'll get the hang of it. So I just took up a pet and I put down some Dragoth Flesh from Games Workshop's contrast paint, as well as you're going to need some contrast medium. I'm using the medium here to thin it out. So the ratio is around approximately 1:1. So I want 1 part contrast paint to 1 part medium. And then of course I'm just going to put a little medium in the side of a cup here. And this will be used actually to thin out the paint even more on the model if I feel that I've globbed a little too much onto here. So you don't need any preparation other than if you have any decals. I highly advise to do them now. So using some micro set and microsol and a little bit of gloss varnish will definitely help you do the decals. But other than that, there's no other preparation. As you can see, the miniature is ready to go. And you're just gonna grab a big brush and start slapping that mixture on. Make sure you give it a good mixture in the palette dish there, just so the contrast paint is thinned and even. and just start applying it all over the place. So on smaller models like this, you can generally get away with doing the whole miniature. If you're going to do this type of process on anything larger like a dreadnought or maybe really big Terminators or something like that, you might want to do it in sections just because of the working time. This does dry slower than acrylics, but it's still an acrylic paint, so you don't expect hours of working time like you're doing with these oils. And the idea here is that I'm just going to go steadily cover the entire miniature. Sorry, my camera is always, for this project's been acting up with the autofocus, and but there it goes. So again, you're just applying all the paint everywhere. And what we're going to do afterwards, after I get the whole model coated, we're going to start pulling off some paint, and we're going to be pulling it off we're going to be thinning it out in a few different methods. The first method is we're going to take some contrast medium, and you're going to apply it on top of the parts that you want to thin the color down. With that contrast medium, it's kind of acts the very similar way to how you'd use mineral spirits. So if this was with an oil wash and you wanted to thin it a part out, we put a little bit of mineral spirits in your brush and dip it on the parts of the miniature of the colors that you want, or you want that to be thinned out. The next part is we can also use a little bit of water. So right here, I'm mainly getting the contrast paint to thin out on the top. So like where I've done the primary big highlights of this miniature. So on the shoulder pads, the head, the top of the backpack, the shoulder here, and then even on the power fist and stuff, I'm just using some of that contrast medium to thin out that color in those areas. Because I don't want to cover up all of the highlight work that we've done. If you want to like not thin it out and you want it really, really dark and grimy, you can. That's your choice. But to me, you lose a little bit of the color and the drama when you do this. So, the idea of doing this wash is I'm getting kind of like a grim dark look, but you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get some really good, contrast and some pop, but you still get, some of the weathering and grime that comes along with this process. And it also kind of unifies all the colors together into like this kind of like reddish brown flesh tone that everything gets a little bit of this color on there. If you can see, like now I'm just on my brush, there's just water, so now I'm just starting to pull some paint off. And when your brush gets too full with some of the contrast paint that you're pulling off, you need to rinse your brush and then just wipe it on a kitchen towel or something like that so it's fairly dry. See, my brush is dry again, and now I'm going back and just pulling off, just almost like touching it. And it kind of works like capillary action when you touch a blob of when there's too much standing paint of contrast, it kind of pulls it off and it kind of sucks it into the bristle as well. And I'm just looking for like, you don't want like floating pools of contrast. So if you see like there's too much of a floating pool, and they mostly will like kind of tend to hover down towards the bottom and into middle of panels. See, I'm trying to spread it around there. I don't want it to sit in these pools and kind of give like this coffee stain look. So again, like when you're doing this method, you have to work a little bit faster. If doing the whole model kind of scares you at once, a good way to practice it is just on a section at a time. Maybe even just for the first model when you're doing it, get comfortable with it, feel how this process works. And then quickly when you've done one model a section at a time and you get a feel for it, then you can just jump. Then I would jump straight to the unit and start doing a whole model at a time. Don't flood each model, put it down, and then wash the next model. Finish that model first, just because of the drying time of contrast. It will, by the time you get back to the first model, the working time for the contrast will probably be up, or the majority of it will be up, and then you'll be a little bit too late. As you can see, like a lot of it after I, slosh it on, you're gonna see me, I'm starting to more or less, I'm picking up the contrast off the model now. I'm not applying anything else on. But it gives a cool effect, like it goes over the metals, it gives it a bit of a wash here. And if you notice, especially on the lightest parts of the miniature, that's where it affects the most. So especially on like the laurels and the ultramarine symbol, I was trying to pull off as much as you can. And especially and then next is like try to pull it off of so they're not pooling too much on the highlight. You see me now, I'm just adding just little bits now, so I'm just really trying to target the little bit of the recesses, because if you pull off too much you can always just add little bits at a time. But now I'm being much more controlled, so I'm not like lathering the whole model again. I'm just picking out areas that I want to bring a little bit of contrast back into the recesses, mostly the recesses, not so much on the whole plane of each surface. And then after you're done, just let that dry. Okay, so after you do the contrast, you might have to do some corrections, and it mainly has to do with the brightest parts of the miniature, so anything that we highlighted with any of the lighter grays or the off-whites they've been using. And we're going to start off with the ultramarine symbol. So what you can do on your palette here is you can just take some Mojave white again, and I thin this down at least a 1:1. You can almost thin it down to a 2:1 too, if depending on the coverage that you want. I like to leave a little bit of the contrast paint to like show through some of the work, so you have a little bit more depth to your painting. So if that's something that you want to manage, just thin it out to like 1.5 parts water to 1 part paint, and just watch the charge. So keeping a really thin charge and just reapplying pretty much your highlights that you're doing before. So most notably on the bevel, that is the bevels that are facing upwards, and then on the primary face where the highlights are, especially on the ultramarine symbol. I do like to make this a little bit brighter just because it's the Legion symbol. It kind of looks good when it stands out, so people can identify it. And it's a nice like focal point detail on the model itself. And then again, just reinforcing that highlight, especially down the center, where pretty much like the apex of that curve on the shoulder pad sticks out. And see how they using around a 1.5 to 2 parts thinned to paint, that 2:1 ratio, see how it goes over. And then when it quickly dries, you can still see that contrast underneath that shows through. And I quite like that look. I'm not really accustomed to painting with like full opacity paint all the time. So yeah, after the shoulder pad's done, and then the two other areas that I really want to like focus on is well, besides the 3 parts is the laurels on the head, so bringing back a little bit of brightness on the laurels from the wash. The center of the chest, so I'm just nicking a few of those the very, very top highlights on the chest there, that detail, as well as the fingers on the power fist, so bringing some of that color back. Again, if you don't want to go so bright, you want to leave it more dark and grimy, by all means, go ahead. All these little touches here, of course, add a bit of extra time onto each model, and make the full hours of each tabletop miniature a little bit longer. But depending on the finish that you want for the squad, do what you do what you feel that is necessary, and is keeping track a little bit of time. If you want to get these guys down on the table quicker, you're going to skip this step. But especially if you're looking to up your game on a tabletop miniatures, one of the things I always tell a lot of my students is, if you just want to up the resolution a little bit more, just add an extra highlight. So you're going to you're going to add 15 minutes onto each model, and then just do the math, so you're gonna add another 4 hours of work onto a squad, but an extra 2 to 4 hours, or not even that, will just make the difference. And again, I decided to add a little bit more highlight back into the power fist cable, but of course not everyone has a power fist, so this is only the sergeant. Okay, so this section here, now we're going to finish off the blue, and we're going to make a thick glaze or a thin layer. So this is approximately 3 parts water to 1 part paint. You saw me right there. I'm just wiping off some of the charge off the brush so that I don't flood the model when I'm doing this. And right here, we're just going to be, first off, I'm going to be picking out the volume. So the top of the shoulder pad, and anywhere the max highlights where I want to bring more blue into the piece in total. And that's mostly all the upwards facing parts of the miniature, as well as the majority of parts that are the waist and up. Like I said before, anything below we'll generally leave darker, but near the top we want to bring a little more light and a little more blue into the mixture here. And the reason why we're using such thin paint again is that I want a little bit of the previous layers to show underneath, but I still want to create some highlights. And this is not edge highlighting, of course, this is just all on the volumes. And it's a little bit, of course, to your discretion, and as well as this stage is another one, kind of like an optional, is if you want a little bit of a brighter and a cleaner model, this is necessary for it, especially after the contrast, because it does stain. It does stain and tint a little bit of the color that went over. But again, this is also really useful to help blend in some of the decals, because a lot of the Ultramarines decals are mostly white. And the thing is, with a decal, especially if it's just pure white and just sticking out like that, it looks a little bit detached. As I like to do a thin glaze of the blue on top of the white to kind of unify the decal, so it kind of looks nested and that it's part of the material, rather than it's so so separated that it looks like before. Again, according to this model's pose, I really like how he's stepping forward into the frame, and I really want to show that foot is stepping out into the light. Also, since this is a sergeant, he's not holding the bolter across his chest like the majority of the Space Marines. His chest is very wide open, and his leg stepping forward is also very much in the open of space, so that's why it's going to receive a little bit of highlight. And just with this mixture, you're just going to go around parts of the model and just bring in a little bit more light. Again, it's a little bit your discretion, what parts of the miniature that you want to highlight. Generally, I like to keep them near the top and to places of actual importance. So And what I mean by importance when you're painting a miniature is like the most important aspects of a model are generally like the head and its actionable like limbs. So like the arms, you know, there's a lot of expression in hands because we manipulate the world mostly with our hands. So anything that the model's holding and its arms in general, we like to give extra little bit of light towards. And this is what I mean by like what you want to emphasize. And then the back of the leg, again, you know, we have the front of the leg that's stepping forward, and since this leg is backwards and it's like kind of like the planting, the leaving foot, so it's being planted on the right and it's leaving from the left, that area is receiving a lot of light upwards, so it's nice to give a little bit of highlight onto there just to show a little bit of depth in his motion going forward. A lot of grime got hit into the glove, but I'm just going to bring a little bit of blue back. The nice thing also is just keeping in mind that we have another weathering stage to go through. So we're going to be adding chips and, you know, chips and scratches and stuff. So to follow up with like the worn look, you know, you don't have to, you're not aiming for 100% opacity even on these highlight stages. It's okay to leave a little bit of like bleed through. It doesn't have to be super smooth. It's because, you know, this is going to be ending up a bit of like not like a true grimdark style like that classic look, but somewhere in between. That's what I was trying to achieve anyway with this, with like my miniatures and with this army in particular. Now all I've done is you've taken up some that sky blue and you've added some white, and I decided to add a little bit more light, a little more value up on the very highest parts. So again, it's just going back to repeating from the previous stage, but just focusing more of the highlights going upwards towards the light and leaving a little bit of space from the previous layer so you can just show off that transition. And especially the nice thing is, since we're using such a thin mixture, you know, they naturally like blend pretty well. You don't have to do any like, we're not doing any intermediate blends or anything. The majority of the color is already there from the blue airbrush stage, so that's why we can just use such a thin mixture of paint. Sorry for the camera gets a little bit blurry here, but the ventilation holes, the grill on his mask, all I'm doing is putting a dot on the bottom edge. So that edge is the edge that's facing upwards. So by just doing little highlights on the edges there, we get a little more depth to be shown. As well as that big bevel on his helmet. That big bevel is really facing upwards. I really want to show off that part of the helmet. So you don't have to just edge highlight that, but you paint the whole plane that's facing upwards in this highlighted color. And you know, you can really show the emphasis of the shape of the helmet. And here I start doing a little bit of edge highlighting. You don't have to, like, even for this style, you don't have to go and highlight every single edge. All I'm doing is highlighting any vertical edges and then any edges that are facing upwards. I'm ignoring the ones that are facing down because this is generally not the primary source of the light direction. And I like to keep it that way, as well as actually for army painting, again, it takes a little less time. Yeah, bring a little bit of light towards on top of the helmet. I find that, of course, really important, just like the main parts of expression on a miniature. You know, if you're going to spend any time, just give a little bit extra attention to the head or the helmet. This is where I'm going to break that rule of upwards facing edges only. I will do an edge highlight on the downward facing edge of the shoulder pads, just because they're such like prominent parts of the armor, and I want to, you know, I would like to show the whole shape. So I find it's a little bit, you know, it helps to give an edge highlight there. And I will pick part of the shoulder pad that is at the apex of the highest curvature towards the towards the point of a highlight, so kind of like a zenithal highlight from above, so that part of the shoulder pad is closest. As well as now I'm just giving some bottom reflections of those studs. I find this kind of fun. It gives the studs a little more of a three-dimensional look to them. Without any of these highlights, they tend to start to look kind of two-dimensional. So if you add those, if you add a balanced light reflection, so I'm just taking the blue and I'm just highlighting kind of like a crescent moon on the underside of each of those studs, you'll get a little bit of reflection, a little bit of blue in the gold. And I'm just re-emphasizing, just giving a little more highlight into the glove. Keep in mind, like this is not like super neat. Even though you're seeing this at ×2 speed, this whole highlight stage goes by pretty quick. Without the cuts, this is about 16 minutes to do. So not too much, not too long at all. And I don't have to focus on being like super neat here. I'm just using your brushwork and just sketching in those areas there. And also keep in mind how your paint or your brush makes a mark. So the first time you do this type of highlight with this consistency, just do a single stroke, take a look at how it looks like, and let it dry. The biggest chances are, especially if you're using scale 75 paints, is that the initial mark, even though this is a glaze, will look a lot brighter. Like if you're even paying attention, if you're even taking a look a little bit closer, is when the paint is wet, it looks really bright. But as soon as it dries, it dulls way down. It's because it's not wet, it's not reflecting nearly as much light from your lamps, and it's actually drying true to the tone. So a lot of the times when you're seeing you're watching this paint, and even with other tutorials out there too, not just mine, but you're watching other people's tutorials, never end with your own painting. Don't judge the color by what your paint looks like when it's wet. Give it a second, let it dry, and then take a look at its results. And then if you want to make this any brighter, remember, since we're painting with such a thin layer, like around like that 3:1, if you give another layer on top of that, subsequent layers, anytime you layering paint, subsequent layers always give more opacity and more saturation. So if you want more of that pure color, just give a second layer on top of it. And for bonus, you could even make the highlighted area of the second layer a little bit smaller, and you'll start to see a nice transition coming along, even without any other glazes or blending. And that's it for the blue Armour. So we don't have to touch that anymore, and we keep moving on. So we've done a nice airbrushing stage. We mucked it up afterwards with some contrast paint. Then we cleaned it up with highlights. And now I'm going to tell you to destroy it yet again. So we're going to grab some burnt umber. This paint's from Scale 75, the Scale Artist series. But honestly, any real dark brown will do. Any dark brown, I generally would lean towards more of a red ochre kind of paint, but any dark brown will do. And we're going to start painting on some chips. And so it's going to require a sharper brush. So right now I'm using like my Artist Opus 00, I believe. 0 or 00, anything with a sharp point. And the paint, I'm going to water that down. I'm going to thin it down to roughly a 1-to-1 mixture. And you just want to use the very tip of our brush. So at the beginning, some people might find to get these real like thin hairline cracks is a little bit tricky. But the trick to it, and how I like to keep myself with a very light hand, is you almost want to like tickle the surface with the very tip of your brush. So you're just doing you're just grazing the tip along the paint, so you get this very thin hairline cracks or like hairline scratches. And most of the time, like there's a few different patterns I mostly do, like loose patterns. Is one of them is kind of like a comet, or I like to say like an impact comet. So I just imagine something hitting the surface, and then like, you know, if it did a glaze, like a glancing hit, it will leave a bit of a streak and a little bit of cut into the armor. The second is like little dots. So those are quite simple. Just want to like touch the very tip of the brush along the edge of the model, or where you want those hits. And little modifications is almost like little cracks and scratches. Now, the style that I do them in is, you know, I don't think they're 100% super realistic. They're a little more of illustrative, and I like to keep it that way. I like to make the scratches a little more dynamic, and a lot of if you want to look for some patterns that will kind of help you, I think like mecha anime is a really good, like Gundam. A lot of the scratches and stuff I got is through Gundam, and actually my favorite source of original inspiration where I kind of got this idea is from one of my favorite movies as a kid, Transformers the movie. If you ever watch the scene between Optimus Prime and Megatron, their final duel, when you get to see Optimus Prime on the ground, just before he almost gets put down by Megatron and says never and hits him off the wall, they do a really great shot of the amount of cracks and damage these guys take up, and that's always been ingrained in my head. So how I paint these like cracks and scratches has like a reference to that, as well as if you ever look at a lot of you know, classic scratches and stone cuts and stuff like that from like 90s style graffiti, that plays a real big inspirational part on my personal artistic career, and a little bit how it goes into how I paint all these chips and scratches. Of course, if you want a little more of a realistic look, you know, really good examples are from like some certain scale modelers, like tank scale modelers. They do some really fine cracks and scratches. The hardest part is to not accidentally create patterns out of these things. Battle damage should have a sense of not complete randomness, because we want to aim for areas, we want to put scratches and cuts and, you know, glancing shots and stuff like that where it would mostly be on the miniature. So a good exercise is just to like, you kind of like do a little bit of a thought experiment and just imagine yourself or imagine seeing a scene of a Space Marine and where the places they would get shot up and put the damage there. So, you know, especially on the Power Fist, man, that, you know, he's punching everything from traders to walls to tanks. He's you know, it's a big utility tool, so it's going to see a lot of damage, and there's going to be other areas in the model that are going to receive less punishment. And right here, there's kind of like it's almost like a crack, like I'm kind of making the armor look stressed and cracked. So it's not just like chips, but the nice thing is if you go in the mindset of combining a few different types of damage, so everything from like little bullet holes to little shrapnel chips, and then even like these stress cracks here, a nice variation I think just goes a long way to make it look more weathered and beat. And you know, it keeps it kind of fun. I think the easiest thing you can do when doing this is going overboard, but who cares, you know? Have fun with it. If you really want to make them look weathered, really look beat with all these like cracks and stuff, go right ahead. And I do a fair amount on these guys because I think they're veterans of this long war, and I think they've been on the battlefield in a prolonged campaign, and I wanted to illustrate that. Of course, a lot of damage and a lot of weathering, especially along the edges and stuff, are really going to be down at the feet. So a good thing to keep in mind, especially on edges that are downwards facing, especially towards the bottom of the feet, is that you really don't have to do, almost no blue should be showing on the edges. They could all just be pretty much chipped. So to give a little more graphic and a little more variation in depth. What I put on here, I just added some white onto the palette, and I'm mixing some of my burnt umber with the white to get a highlight, mixing up a highlight here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start highlighting some of these chips, and we're going to highlight the insides of them. And we're just aiming for the large ones, and you don't have to do every single one. Again, we want to make the weathering appear, a lot of variation, a little bit of randomness, and we don't want too much of a consistent pattern. So a general rule of thumb is I only aim for the large ones. So the larger pieces, and then the ones that are closer to the light. So however you highlighted your Space Marine, anything that's in the highlighted points, if you look at, like, for instance, I'm just doing some of the spots on the legs, is I'm only applying this highlight down the center where the blue highlight is. I'm not bothered going into the shadows, because that's already not receiving a lot of light. So, and these chips will only really be present if it's in the light itself. So again, it's less chips to highlight. And also by not highlighting every single chip, we can also express that some of the cuts are deeper, some of them are shallower. And to show off that even more, one final highlight is we're going to highlight the underside of some of these chips. Again, we don't have to do every single one, only do the main ones, and as well as keep them more towards the highlighted sections. Stuff in deep shadow, I wouldn't really bother. And you don't have to highlight the whole length of it. I think that's another mistake. It looks a little too even, as well as even on if you highlight the bottom of it and you leave some of the tail unhighlighted, this also gives you a variation of depth within the cut. So it started off deep. As it goes away from the cut, as it's like a glancing hit, it's going to get shallower and shallower until the point where it's not going to make a deep enough cut to show an actual highlight on the underside, because it's supposed to represent something actually digging into the material. So again, a little more variation, and these extra things when you're painting on chips, it's kind of fun. And also, if you've made any mistakes from the previous sections, or you just don't really like maybe how Glaze highlighted a part of the armor, or you screwed up on the Legion symbol, or sometimes we have mistakes for when we apply decals, we get a little bit of ghosting, you can cover it up. Alright, to paint the Sergeant's plume, is we base coat the whole plume black, and then the grays that we have is a graphene gray, rainy gray, and then we have some white and some black on the palette there. And we're just going to paint every each section with the graphene gray. The easiest thing to do is to kind of you can almost count the little, if you really wanted to, you can count the little grooves in each helmet. That's pain in the ass. That's if you want to be really accurate, but I just tend to eyeball things. So just to evenly space them out, going alternating from black to gray, and try to get as even as possible. A good thing to do is, instead of stressing out exactly where they are right at the beginning, especially since you're painting over black, you will have to do a couple of layers on this. So getting the opacity down with these light grays is more essential, and it's much easier once you have the opacity that you desire for the paint, for the gray. Then you can always get black and cut back, which I'll do later. This is a lot easier and a lot less stressful than trying to do these base coats and worry about the exact spacing while also trying to keep the opacity. So after you get that down, now we're just going to highlight all the little grooves. And you can do this in two ways. You can either, I'm aiming for the you know, for the raised areas in the plume, but it's also just as effective as if you can't get every single groove, just make lines. And especially for the top, because the top doesn't really have any relief in this Games Workshop sculpt, so you just have to literally just paint horizontal lines across as straight as you can, you know, just using the very tip of your brush, and just create these lines even if there's not any like grooves per se. Once you get these lines down, they will read as if there's actual grooves within the model, and no one will ask twice about it. And as we highlight it up, we go from graphene gray, and then you highlight up to a rainy gray. And you can see here, after the first stage highlight, this is where I start to clean up with the black. You know, I have some spilled over paint, and I just need to clean that up with a straight black, and it covers really, really nicely and really easy. Now to highlight the black parts, all you need to do is you can either get like you just mix a little bit of black with a little bit of the rainy gray, just getting a very low value gray, or if you have a very very dark gray that's lower than both values of the off-white sections that you painted, that will work too. A good estimate is getting like half of the amount of lightness in comparison to the white section of the hair plume. If you get the black highlight too close to the white, it doesn't really look like black. And you barely need any highlight. It's nothing much at all. And it's very simple, just a few lines, and you're done. Amazing, guys, you made it this far. Very close now. We're on to the eyes. So the few paints that you're just gonna need here is by scale 75 I use fuchsia, or you can use any magenta color that you like. There's black and then some white. Really simple. So while you fill in the eyes with black, we're gonna go in here with, I mixed fuchsia just with a little bit of black to get myself a darker value, and I'm just carefully painting in the eye, making sure that I'm leaving a small little gap of black that separates like a black kind of like outlining of the lens. This will really help later on when we decide to create a glow effect. We need a little bit of that space just to give a little bit of variation in value. And we're going to be layering up. So the second layer here, now I'm just taking pure fuchsia. And the funny thing is with magenta colors is generally they're very weak. They don't have very strong coverage. So expect to do a couple of layers. Remember to keep them thin, and thin your paints just down a little bit. You don't have to do a pure 1-to-1, but just enough just to get a little bit of flow. And now I'm building up the highlights, and to build the highlights you're just mixing a little bit of white with some fuchsia, and you're going to start to create more of this this cool pink. And again, when we're dabbing it in the eyes, we just want to try to respect a little bit of space. I've added a lot of water into this fuchsia, so we're creating a rough glaze, and I'm just going to pretty much coat the edge of the helmet there, and getting ready to get rid of a little bit of get some of the glow ready to go. The mixture of that glaze here, this is about like 4 to 5 parts water to 1 part paint, so it's pretty thin. Just watch your charge so you don't flood the area. And now I'm going to create another glaze just with pure fuchsia, and that's like 4 parts water to 1 part paint. And now what I'm going to do here is, now I'm just going to carefully paint the part of the underside of that lens, so that nice shelf where you see that nice bevel, we're going to get a lot of that glow. If it's on a regular Space Marine helmet, this is the exact same thing, but you'll just be painting the underside of the eye, so just right under the lens. But for this helmet has a lot of a very strong feature in the front, so you can really take advantage of that. And even if you make this, when you're making that glaze, it's always better to make it a bit thinner than a bit thicker. The glazes tend to, they dry fairly quick, and I actually go through approximately 3 layers of this glaze of fuchsia. So you know, just like that, 3 to 4 parts water to 1 part paint again. And you just want to take your time, and just watch the charge. You don't see how thin the brush is. There's not a lot of, like, you don't see any swelling of the brushes in there. That's a good sign that there's not too much charge in the brush. If you flood the model, we kind of we'll start to lose the effect, and you'll start to lose the control of the paint. We might get this we might get the glow highlight in areas we don't want it to. And now we can go back and we can take a very, very bright mixture of just a little bit of fuchsia with mostly white. So it's like a 70-30 or 80-30. And I'll start dotting it in the center of the lens. And since with the thinness of the paint around close to like 1-to-1 in that instance there, a few layers, that's all you need, a few little touches, and then the eye's done. Moving on to the plasma pistol, we'll take the same dark fuchsia that we used at the beginning of the eye, and we'll start to base coat all the coils of the plasma pistol here. And after when that's done, we'll start to take just straight white, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the bottom of the plasma pistol coil with white. What this is going to do is to help cover a larger area and to give a larger glow, we're going to be using the Airbrush. So a nice secret is using Airbrush, and we're going to be using a magenta, like a flow magenta paint by Vallejo. And what this will do is it'll greatly get a lot of strength from the paint off this white, and will help create this glow. Really helpful, especially for like plasma pistols. This is a nice and quick and easy way to do it without spending a ton of time. For instance, if we were doing this for a character, we would be a lot more careful in terms of its application in between each of the coils, and doing a slower blending process to give us a more like accurate glow representation. But for tabletop miniatures, I find just giving this base coat here and then just outlining with some of it with white, and picking up the airbrush is more than efficient and good to do that for. The only reason why I don't use the airbrush for the eyes is there's a lot of detail going on there, and it just takes one little slip with an airbrush to kind of like really ruin your day. And where this gun especially, it's sticking out forward of the Space Marine itself, it's a lot easier to get at angles, so we're not getting a ton of overspray all over the place where you don't want it. So with the magenta that's in the airbrush, very simple. It's the same airbrush that I used at the beginning of this tutorial, set at 2 bars, and it's with a 0.4 needle, and it's a harder Steinbeck. And we'll just be doing small shots, allowing just a little bit each time. You can use the air of the airbrush to dry it off the area, and I'm just making sure that I wasn't angling the airbrush pointed towards the miniature. After you do the initial one coat of the thin coat of the airbrush, you're going to go back with white, and I'm going to highlight over the same spots again. What this will do is that the magenta mostly was mostly strengthened by the white, but of course that the neon or the fluorescent paint coated the rest of the model a little bit weaker, but we still get some of that color. So then we're just doing a second layer of white, and we'll go back with the airbrush again to get a little more intensity out of it. Also, the nice thing here is if you use a little bit of white and you thin it down a little bit, it'll flow pretty nicely. So here, if you look, I'm actually aiming the airbrush. I'm spraying at a 90 degrees of the horizon, but then shooting it towards the model. This is so that I just get a little bit of the magenta onto the shoulder pad. If you take a look where the stud on the shoulder pad is, you can actually see a little bit happening. But I'm also aiming it at the very tip of the barrel there as well, just to get a little bit of the plasma go getting ready to leave the barrel. And again, I'm just getting a little bit of white just at the tip of the barrel there, so it's ready to looks like it's about to be ready to be fired. Now on the tip of your brush, I'm just getting the same fluorescent paint. Again, it's by Vallejo, and I'm just grabbing a little bit of that paint, not thinned or anything like that, and I'm just applying it to the underside of each of those, each of the golden studs. I like this effect. It helps give an extra reflective point. It makes the it makes that shoulder pad a little more interesting for sure. You know, and it doesn't matter if it goes on top of a part of the blue that you've done in a previous stage. And if you don't like the fuchsia from the scale 75, you can always sub that in with this neon paint right at the end. You can just put a thin layer with your brush into the eyes. Guessed? So of course, after with our contrast and we painted our chips and did our highlights with the blue, we're going to come back to the metallics now. Now, after the contrast section, we gave the whole model a coat of ultramatte varnish. And what this actually did is it completely dulled down our metallics. It took away a lot of the shine. So here we're actually going to bring it back. And the reason why we want to bring it back, and what's interesting, is that we can get some interesting and cool contrast, not only just with values of the metallic paint, but we can also gain contrast through the finish of the surface as well. So in the shadows, we have naturally a very matte looking gold along with the contrast paint that gave us further shading. And now we're bringing back the exact same gold, but we're also bringing it back with the metallic flake intact on the model. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm just taking the same Vallejo metal color gold, and we're just going to be applying highlights into all of our gold areas. So pretty much like along, you know, the trim, the crest, and the helmet. And what I want to do is I want to pick out areas, like especially along the curve. I want to pick like the apex of the curve, as well as giving the edges a nice edge highlight with this paint. And it looks really great. It gives you a lot of depth in the gold. It gives you a little more, just a little more dynamic with your metallics, and they kind of fit the little bit of the lighting scheme a little bit better. It's the principle is very similar to like N&M, where we want to paint highlights along curvatures and apexes of curved surfaces in particular to give a highlight, but we're just doing this with metallics. And the nice thing is doing with metallics, it has a nice metallic sheen that we like of the paint, as well as it's fairly forgiving actually when you highlight with metallics, is because not only the placement of the shines, but also just how the miniature is being held and lit within the room will determine, you know, where the real bright points are. So just carefully going, and I'm just you know, gathering most of the highlights towards the top, you know, the top of that curvature on the shoulder pad, and giving a nice bright point on the flat side, as well as on the helmet crest, you know, towards the front of the helmet and the top. That's where like the apex of that curve is. That's where I want to pick out most of the gold. And you can kind of almost let your brush do a little bit of overbrushing. Now, remember, this paint in general is very, very thin. So with these highlights, the only thing you'd really have to watch out for is the charge of the brush. So, you know, I'm picking up even less paint, and even in between picking up paint, I'm generally wiping off, or I'm touching it on a kitchen towel so I don't pick up too much, because I don't want to flood the area like we were with base coating the gold. And now I can, you know, just touch the very, very tops of these, the studs, which is a lot less stressful than painting the whole stud gold, I'll tell you that for sure. Or we can just put dots at the very top and you'll be fine. Here I'm just doing the flat side of the the curve of the shoulder pad there on the trim, and just you know, making sure I do a tour and make sure I got the angles that I want and the areas I want to highlight. Now for the silver, it's the exact same Vallejo model color, metal model color steel, so I'm just going straight back onto there. And when it comes to when it just comes to the exhaust ports here on the round end, just a general rule of thumb when you're doing these highlights, since it's on a round surface, make the highlight round, so it should complement the shape that it's on. And then those the little flares, the exhaust flares, are almost like they're almost like cylinders, so just pick the general angle and just put down a highlight point. And if anything, all you have to do is like see where the cylinder part meets the exhaust flare. Just leave that recess black, or leave that recess in that dark metal that has that matte finish, and you get a very nice contrast on the metals there. And as a final bonus, if you want to give a little more highlight, this is another great color by Vallejo Model Air color. It's chrome, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to particularly highlight the especially the gold areas, and all I'm doing is just placing these these little touches of gold on the brightest parts of the highlights of each of the golds, and just remember just to respect the previous layer, and just aim to make these highlights nice and small. If you make these highlights too big, the gold starts to look less like gold. It starts to look just much more like silver. So keep these dots, the dots pretty small. And even on the stud shoulder pads, just keep them to the top of the shoulder pads. You don't have to highlight every single one with the chrome. Now it's time to finish it off with a nice simple base. I just like using this textured paint by AK, Desert Sands. It doesn't really matter if you want to get desert sands or like loose rock, whatever texture you really like. They come in various colors, but I end up always painting over them anyway. This is much easier if you don't mount the model on the base, but for the sake of this tutorial, and I know that some people glue the models down on the base, I will work around it. And you're just going to apply this textured paste around carefully with like a spatula, and just carefully not to get too much onto the model. If you get little bits on the legs and stuff, the more dirt and weathered all to you. But I try to keep it fairly neat and let most of the pigment do most of the work that's going to be fashioned on the legs of the Space Marine. So after that is dried, you can just slap paint straight on top of it. So again, I am using Scale Artist color Burnt Umber, and just with a bit of mix of water just so it flows a little bit easier. And I'm just gonna give the ground a nice covering of this Burnt Umber. You might need a second layer, depending how thin you made the paint and how much you want it to flow. If anything, make sure if any of those Space Marines have their leg raised that you get the underside of the boot as well, and to make sure you put a little bit of that textured paint on the underside of the boot, just to make sure to get that detail. And after that's dry, we're going to get some pigment. So by MIG Emunez, I got this North Africa Dust. I like this color quite well, and it contrasts nicely with the Burnt Umber ground. I'm just going to put it in a little dish, and if you notice, I laid a little bit of kitchen towel on my desk there, just so to make the cleanup a lot easier. This stage does get a little bit messy. And what I'm going to do is going to get a scrap brush, and then I start applying the dry pigment straight onto the base. If you don't have this color, you want other colors, or you want references, it's also known as like weathering powders or dry pigment or paint pigment. It's just a pigment without binder, pretty much. And what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna put it all over the base. I don't mind if it's getting a little bit on the armor, on the feet. That's the whole point of it. And I'm just using the brush in there and just working it into the base and making sure, the pigment really gets into a lot of the textured and crevices that are created on the base. You can allow little bits to pile up. If you want the ground to be a lot darker, you should be taking another brush that's clean and wiping off the majority of it. Or you can take like your airbrush or like an air canister or something and blow off the majority of it. But if you want some other spots on there, just leave it. Now I'm going to take some, in the video here I have some pigment fixer. Honestly, you don't need fixer. If you have white spirit or mineral spirit, that will work just as well, or just to, works fine. And I'm just taking a pipette just so it's easy to application, so I can just touch it on here. You just touch a little bit onto the base and just allow a little bit of the capillary action to start to absorb into the pigment, and this is going to help it fix the pigment in place so it doesn't really move around, because with the one last stage we could be using the airbrush, and I don't want this pigment already down to be blown off, so just putting a little bit of fixer there to help, and you let that dry. Once it's dry to a touch, we're just going to take some Ultramatte varnish, put it in our airbrush, and then I'm just going to dump the remainder of the the pigment that we used in the airbrush. Don't worry, it's not harmful for your airbrush. You give it, just give it a good rinse, a good clean when you're done. But you don't need a ton of pigment. Majority of it is going to be the varnish, and that's going to kind of be the binder that's going to keep all the pigment in place, as well as also we're going to use a Ultramatte varnish just so the ground dries very matte. We don't want shiny dirt, unless of course you're making like wet mud. In that case, we should be using like a gloss varnish. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take the airbrush. Again, the same PSI, 2 bars, and I'm just going to be airbrushing the very, very bottoms and getting a little bit parts of the leg. It's very hard to tell exactly what color or what's going down because it's wet, but when this thing dries, you'll start to see its impact. The best thing to do is just look for the wet areas when you're airbrushing so you know what areas you've hit. And I'm going to make 2 passes around the model, and then I'm going to let it dry. And right now, as I'm using the airbrush, I'm actually just using the air portion. I'm not shooting anything out, and you get to actually see it dry. This is in real time. You can actually see it dry and become very, very matte. It's kind of a cool look. You can see something that's very, very dark and wet, and all of a sudden the ground effect comes quite alive, and it gives a nice easy result that's great for the tabletop. Thank you and congrats on making it to the end of this full multi-part tutorial of the Ultramarines Veteran Sergeant set in the Horus Heresy. I hope you've taken away and learned through this tutorial one of the many techniques, effects, and or painting processes shown that you can apply to your own Ultramarines Legion, or even with some of the color swaps, one of the other 17 that decorates the battlefield of the Horus Heresy. If you've enjoyed this, please consider like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done it already. I do want to hear from your feedback, and it motivates me to create even more content in the future, as well as for more in-depth tutorials ranging from the Warhammer 40k to Age of Sigmar, covering both tabletop and of course high-end display miniatures. Please consider becoming a member of the Pro Palette, and you can find that on my website at bbminiatures.com. Members will gain access to my whole previous and future tutorials, as well as our private community Discord, with a new video tutorial coming out every week. The link is in the description, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy painting.